Good day, everyone. Welcome to WNY Coaches Chalk Talk Podcast. My name is Rich Jacob, and I'm here again with Coach Blair Lipsitz, our Managing Director of Western New York Coaches. I'd like to remind everyone who we are. Western New York Coaches is a local organization here who fosters the growth of all coaches. At the core of our mission is to impact as many young people in sport as we can. We have a sports psychology emphasis, and we really appreciate all the involvement of everyone, new coaches, veteran coaches, and everyone in between, both men and women on all levels. Today, Coach, we're talking about emotional self-regulation. We're going to talk about situational factors, and then we'll spend a few minutes talking about an eclectic approach. First, talking about emotional self-regulation. We all know that we look to grow as a person, understand ourselves a little bit better every moment. And Coach, when we're talking about competitive experiences, we do talk about being able, to control our emotion, to immerse ourselves in the now, to be able to engage in breathing, to be able to understand our triggers, anchor ourselves in certain competitive situations. Maybe you can share a little bit about some of your experiences.
Yeah, I think self-regulation is one of the really, really difficult things to do because you're in such a heightened state whenever you really need it, right? So whenever I always think about when you're on the court, and what so many coaches say is, everyone calm down or stay calm. And what does that immediately elicit out of your team? Anxiety, usually. Yeah. Oh, they don't think we're calm, right? And to me, that's almost the same thing as saying, going up to one of your hitters and being like, you got to hit the ball in the court. Well, I think we all understand that needs to happen, but maybe they don't know how to do that, right? And maybe that's where the coaching comes into play. So maybe that's kind of the same idea with self-regulation, is instead of telling our teams, you need to calm down, they know how to calm down because you've practiced it, you've worked on it. And in that moment, when they start feeling that, then I think they can make a change.
Yeah, that's good. And like you say, reminding them of what it is we're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where sports psychology comes into play. I think this is where the individual meetings with coaches. I mean, when we talk about the dynamic between the sports psychologist and the coach, mm-hmm. but also, of course, all coaches are incorporating the principles of sports psychology into their coaching. So, things like, how well do you know each player off the court or off the field? How much time and energy do you spend on getting to know each individual? I think that's important, although it's maybe goes without saying that, of course, we want to get to know our student athletes off the field, off the court, but mm-hmm. do we really take the time to help ourselves understand what's happening in their life, who they are, where they come from? And I think this idea of emotional self-regulation is, of course, unique to every individual.
Oh, definitely. And one of the big things, I think really early on in my coaching career, I would just say, it's okay, we're going to work through it. And it was hard to work through it because obviously sometimes players don't know how to work through it, right? So we would be in a drill and the drill wouldn't be going great. And I'd say, it's okay, just ignore what has happened and let's move forward. And in that moment, I feel like what I should have said is feel and understand what you're going through right now, because that feeling's going to happen in a game, right? And having them recognize what's happening within their own emotional state so that they can then self-regulate, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. You're right. We do our best as coaches to simulate the game experience in practice, and we get as far as we can go. But you're right. Things like
it's going to come up, right? If it comes up in practice, it's going to come up in a game. You're going to feel that lull. You're going to feel that just blah feeling, I say sometimes when you're in practice. Some days, game day, you're not going to have it. So you've got to kind of figure out a way to keep yourself calm.
It's true. Van Morrison, the great singer, has a song titled Back on the Corner Again. And when we get to these places in competition, like, have a basketball example, each time that I'm on the foul line, when the game's on the line, I've missed 6 out of 7 times.
And that's in your brain.
Yeah.
Just replaying, right?
Right. So how do we, like you say, and you said it, how we teach the athlete to cope and to contend with these moments, with these situations that they find themselves in and maybe not being able to get past. So this idea of self-regulation, brings to mind this anchoring.
I was just going to ask. Yeah.
So what are we going to do here? Well, we remind ourselves what we want to do. I mean, Jim Paxson hit the winning shot for the Chicago Bulls at one time, and they said, "Well, how did you do that? What did you do?" He said, "I did what I do every day: catch and shoot. I breathe, I catch, I shoot. I didn't change anything." And so the idea of, again, going back to practice habits, going back to habits of mind, if we can stay immersed in the now, every moment, and you also alluded to it, Coach. You make that mistake, for example, and where do you go from there? Well, you erase it as quick as possible and move on to the next play.
Right.
The faster you can erase and move on to the next play, the better chance of your performance, sustaining, maintaining that high level. I think that brings us to situational factors, and let's talk a little bit about us as coaches and habits that we have, principles that we own, philosophies that we practice.
Right.
Well, our way of doing things is not always going to be the best for that situation. So again,
that is true.
Right? So true. So this idea of self-awareness at a professional level. Okay, Coach. Well, you hope that your assistant coaches will complement you and bring something that you don't bring, right? We all look for that chemistry in our coaching staff where I have strengths, my assistants have different strengths, and together, we hope to make the best decisions. But this idea of responding to the situation is a critical one. And some moments we're gonna go back to what we know best, and we're always doing the best we can. We understand that. But we have to try to be to react to situations as they are, and what is best for your team, not what's most comfortable for you or what you know best. So, and I know this is a tough question, but how do you comment on this type of thing?
Well, I think it's kind of self-regulation of the coach, right, is what we're talking about.
Yes.
And I think for different teams, you need different approaches. Like you're saying, some teams will need that stoicism where everything is very consistent all the time. We had teams like that needed that from me. But then you have other teams that I think maybe feed off of a little bit more energy. And sometimes you got to give them a little bit more energy, even if it's not something that you are incredibly comfortable with all the time. And I'm not saying you have to be like a fake cheerleader on the sideline, but sometimes they look to you for that. And then you kind of get into the question of how much do you want them to look to you for energy? Do you want to be the one pouring all of that energy in, or do you want to let your team create their energy on court and you be there as a support system?
That's a good point, because you have a plan, But again, the situation comes in front of you,
Right.
and that plan might not be worth anything in that moment. And
I feel like stoicism was maybe the biggest one, right? Like just having a coach, particularly a head coach, who is just like always calm, and everybody feels very secure with that because they always act like that. But now, and in different sports, it's different, which I also think is interesting because basketball coaches are notoriously energetic. Up and down the sidelines, yelling and screaming the whole time and like stomping the feet, I feel like is something. But in volleyball, you never see that. Almost never. So it's funny that it's almost like that it's been adopted into that sport more.
Well, I think that's true. And when we talk about coaching styles, like you're saying, stoicism, this idea of being autocratic, my way or the highway, or different coaching style is relationship oriented.
Right.
Other coaching styles incorporate social support. Even others are, driven by feedback. Right. And feedback is of course very important. What kind of feedback? The use of positive psychology comes into mind when we think about feedback. It's like if a basketball example is boxing out. Right, so in the principle of boxing out for some of us is, well, you anticipate the shot, you look to check the first step of your opponent, kind of cut off the first step of your opponent, make contact, and then seek the ball. So when you're evaluating, when you're in practice or in a game or going over video, you see that someone doesn't check that first step.
Right.
So how do you correct that? You remind them, check the first step. Always remind them what you want to do, not, hey, you didn't.
Yeah.
Or look at you, that type of correction maybe isn't as fruitful in the end. I mean, that again, this
well,
is...
who wants to go back for more feedback if that's what it's going to be, right? If you're an athlete and you're like, I'm not going back for more information.
Yeah,
as opposed to the other way, right?
It can be more productive, and I think that's important for coaches to note, that the more productive the feedback can be, and consistent, right? When, as you say, the coach's demeanor during the game, and going back to what you just said, absolutely. If a coach is over emotional in the moment, that's going to carry over to the players,
right?
And it could shake the moment, and not in the best way. And it has happened. I know it has happened to me. I know.
I think refs get involved in this space, right? Like, we can't really talk about this without talking about referees and whoever's calling the game, because so often coaches respond to bad calls. And I remember always trying not to respond in a huge way to a bad call, because then it would shake the team, like you're saying, because I felt like they would start getting mad at the refs. And when you start turning your energy into the referee, I think you lose so much of the game, of the momentum. Everything becomes negative on your side. And you just want to keep that out. But it's hard as a coach because you know the rules. And sometimes, they can't see everything, right? Of course, but
no, but that's a great point. And I think if we had other coaches in the room, because I agree with you, I'm with you. I spend my energy on my team. Yeah. And I call.
I mean, there are times I've gone off, of course, on a referee. Well, I'm not going to say I haven't, because I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah, you don't want to share your cookie jar unless you're offering the cookies. So that was my cookie you took.
Right.
I would say that to a ref. Bring them over. I was never one to berate a ref or like you say, try to stage a situation where I'm going to use this to psych my team up or try to shake something up. I get the idea that. You were saying
You've
before.
Seen that before, though. I've seen it used. I've seen coaches use the referee as a way to get not real timeouts, but like try and shake the game and mix the momentum up, and that's frustrating for sure as an opposing coach. But again, you can't give too much energy to it, right? Because then I feel like the team is going to pull that and feel that.
I've witnessed in basketball, more than 50% of the timeout is used yelling at the referee while the team sits over there waiting for direction in important moments. So the point is well taken.
Yeah. But we have to talk about it if we're talking about coach self-regulation, right?
Yeah, good for you. Good for you because, again, just like every player, just like every coach, the referee has had his or her experiences.
Yes.
And as Aristotle says, right, our identity is accumulation of all of our experiences together. So where do they come from? Where does the referee come from? Have they played the game? At what level? Or have they not played the game?
Right. Did they drive 8 hours to get there that day? Like, you just don't know, right?
Yeah, no, you don't know.
Yeah.
You're right, you don't know. And good for you for staying focused on the task at hand, which is coaching your team.
That's always the try.
that's always the try. Coach, let's talk a little bit about in the therapeutic realm. There's this idea of an eclectic approach. So we talk about our own style, our own identity, again, our own experiences, and that's what makes us who we are as a person and as a coach. But I think we have to emphasize today the responsibility of each coach to understand these other styles, these other approaches. Maybe that is not true to their own style. So yes, we understand ourselves. We're aware of our style. We practice our style more than anything. But I think that we have to say it's our responsibility to understand these other styles, other approaches, because it's going to come up in these situations that we're talking about.
Right.
So the idea of being eclectic is not to be an expert in every style, but to certainly be aware of at least the foundations of each approach. And like I say, if we just have these examples of autocratic versus relationship-oriented versus feedback-oriented, and then even social support. And again, a couple comments on social support. That is taking the time to understand who we're coaching.
Right.
Right. We're and by rights, as a coach, we're sometimes totally focused on the task at hand, growing, helping the person grow as a volleyball player and as a team member, and focusing on the function that they play, their role on the team. So all of that, talking about energy, and I like the word that you're using, we do. It's our responsibility as a coach to stay focused on the athlete as a performer. But I caution all coaches, if we don't take the time to understand each individual as a person away from the game, then we're not maximizing their potential and in essence, the team's potential.
Right. And, you're talking about these different styles of coaching, and one is not better than the other. One is not worse than the other. And I think that's important for us to say, right?
Yes.
But that you'll probably end up using all of these, and even if you don't know what they're called, you probably already have, for different players on your team. Some players, like we've said already today, some players need more feedback than others. Some, if you give them too much feedback, I remember I had an athlete who, if I told her she had if she did something really well right before she served, she would miss her serve. And you know that about your athletes.
Right.
Tendencies,
right?
Tendencies, yeah. So that feedback can't come at this time, but feedback is, she really receives it well at this time. And that's, spending a lot of time with your athletes. This was after 4 years of being with her. But
right.
I think eclectic coaching, borrowing different styles from all over the place, I think it also just helps you grow as a coach and learn a little bit more about yourself. Because when I first started coaching, I was definitely a different coach than I was when I ended coaching, because I had to find that style. I think a lot of people anticipated I would coach like my coach, but I am not my coach.
Right.
So I had to find kind of where I fit and where it made more sense for me to be. But it worked for him, and
right.
and he was one of the greats. Of course I think that, but I'm maybe a little biased.
Yeah, well, I think the proof is there.
Yeah.
Well, and that's so important. The point you're making here, being yourself first
Yeah.
is all you can be.
Right.
So, yeah, don't try to be someone else. You know, be
Take, information from different
absolutely.
coaches, right? And read different books and listen to different podcasts
that's
all
right.
of that great stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I think you really have to find and hone in on what your style is. And this is different than a philosophy, which we can get into at another time, but really find what works for you, because if your team knows, or if they even sense a little bit that it's not genuine, they'll pick it up like that, right?
Absolutely. Just like your 3-year-old will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so true. You know, and we talk about understanding ourselves and our style. Like, I think the example is a major correction. When you're looking for an athlete, for example, to make a major correction in one of their fundamentals, like a shooting form in basketball.
Right.
Well, we're not going to make that correction in season.
Yeah, I was just going to say we call that an out-of-season correction.
That's right. We made the major correction in the off season.
Right.
Maybe coaches can do the same thing here. Understanding the idea and the importance of having an eclectic approach, we're putting the demand on you to understand these other approaches, but certainly not in the middle of your season. But in the off season, you could maybe add that to your list. You know, this off season, I'm going to learn one more approach that's not mine.
Yeah.
And will just strengthen myself as a coach.
I have a tough, maybe last question here.
Yep.
But this is about, I think we all recognize when a player is too hyped up, right? And that's when we need to have this self-regulation. What happens when players are, and I'm only using this term because it's the only one I can think of right now, mentally sort of checked out of the game? How do you then bring them back up?
Yeah. Well, I'll sit them down.
Yeah.
Maybe take them right out. And then, again, going back to this positive psychology approach, remind them of what their role is.
Yeah.
Just as simple as it might sound.
Right.
A couple of the fundamentals. Is it?
Yeah, passing.
Yeah, right. So pass. So we need you to pass. Right. And when someone is making the effort to accept their role, a coach has to be very clear.
Yeah.
Right. On the idea of, that's the concept, right? Role clarification. And that's a challenge. That's a process in and of itself. So, and some players, we do know, right? Hey, they're asking me to pass, to be a passer, but I'm a shooter or I'm a ball handler. So there's a struggle.
Right.
There's a struggle in with their identity, and some players respond very well. And again, that has to do with being how clear and how clear the coach is.
And consistent, right?
Yeah, consistency is for sure. So, yeah, mentally checked out. I mean, in their face, reminding them what they have to do, taking them out, or, it might be time for someone else to step up.
Right.
Maybe they have to be removed from the situation. But you're right. It's a difficult.
That's a hard
question.
One. That's a tough.
It's a situation, right?
And it's still self-regulation in a way.
It is.
And from a coach's perspective and an athlete's perspective, because the athlete, obviously something's going on, right? That needs to be helped and fixed, and you want to help and fix. But, the coach also has to stay pretty calm in that situation. And so, yeah.
And when that's in your mind, is maybe that moment where that athlete is mentally checked out has happened before.
Right. Yeah. Potentially. Yeah.
So that's the idea of, okay, what do you do? Right. This is off.
What's the trigger for that?
Yeah. Off the court. And what's the anchor? What do we,
yeah.
How are you, that's the one-on-one. Now, I don't know I think that you shared this also, right? We take time every 10 to 12 days. My players are responsible for setting up a one-on-one meeting with me, behind closed doors. And again, could be 5 minutes, could be 55 minutes,
right?
Depending on the person, the situation, the moment. But again, that is a good place right? We coach them there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Of course, right.
but the example you have is could be a total new situation.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we can read it and feel it and see it, and sometimes we can't. And that's where the whole dialogue, right? We are all equals. So we talked about Jones and his writing about we are all equals, and there's a first among equals.
Mm-hmm.
But if we foster that climate of dialogue, then maybe that player comes to you at a timeout and said, "Coach, I don't have it
today."
Something's going on, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about the relationship.
Yeah.
That it's continuous, it's fluid, the relationship itself, but the confidence and trust that you build in that locker room,
right,
is going to be a factor in those situations as well.
Absolutely.
It's good. And the situations are endless, right? We can
we
can identify in the varying sports many situations, and if we had a call-in section right now, I bet you we would have some great contributors
questions
about that. But that being said, Coach, let's recap with the idea of being eclectic, understanding that the situations that we are involved in as coaches and players are endless, and the idea of checking ourselves and the practice of emotional self-regulation is going to be very important to our personal and professional growth for the individual and ultimately for the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for being here. Western New York Coaches Chalk Talk Podcast, signing out.